Today, what we're going to be talking about are some different vocab words and items that you need to know what they are, what they look like, and how to name them and draw the symbol for. So the first thing that we have is what we call a segment. Segment is just, to make it easy, a line with two endpoints. And there is a picture of a segment for you. So you can see it's a line, but instead of arrows, we have endpoints because segments must end. So usually we have two capital letters under each endpoint, and with those letters we can name it. So we would use this symbol. We draw a miniature segment. Notice there's no arrows on top, and then you name the endpoints. So this would be segment AW or segment WA. Either one is correct. The next object we have is called a ray. And basically a ray is half line segment, half line. So it'll look like a figure that has an endpoint and extends in the opposite direction. So it could go this way or it could go this way. We need to be careful about the ordering of the letters when it comes to rays. For example, since the endpoint is at R and Z is closer to the arrow, I would name this ray RZ. You could not call it ray ZR. Ray ZR would actually look like that, with Z here and R here, and that is not the same thing. So we don't want to do that. When you do the symbol, you draw a miniature ray, and here's the key. The letter closer to the arrow has to be under the arrow, and the letter closer to the endpoint needs to be under the endpoint. If you want to switch your line around, that's fine, but then you have to switch the ordering of your letters. So even though these orders look different, it's still pronounced Ray RZ. Ray RZ. You always pronounce the letter that's under the endpoint first. So what happens if we get two rays that share a common endpoint and make a line? Well, we call that opposite rays. So again, they are just two rays that come together to make a line. And the rays that we put together are rays BE, so that's this ray right here, and ray BQ. Now there is no symbol to say opposite ray, so you kind of just have to write the words opposite rays, BE and BQ. It has to be that order. It would not be correct if you switched it and made it EB and QB. Those are not opposite. Since B is the common endpoint, B is the letter that we use to name first. Parallel lines are something that most people are familiar with. We say that they are lines that don't intersect, but they also travel in the same direction. And that'll make sense in a little bit why we are saying that. So for example, line M and line N would be parallel to each other. We use the two almost looks like slashes. When you see those two slashes, that just means parallel. So if it says M / N, that means M is parallel to line N. Sometimes we'll also see like arrows on the lines. Those indicate lines are parallel. We will review that later in the year though. Skew lines are probably new. Skew lines are the reason we have to be careful about saying what parallel lines are. So skew lines would be lines that don't intersect, but they're not parallel either. And the best way to show that is through a box, something that's 3D. So for example, line MJ and line RT, they're definitely not parallel because they're not running in the same direction, but they aren't touching either. So we would call those skew. So skew lines have to be in different dimensions, otherwise they would touch. There is no symbol for skew, so we just write skew. And we would just say line RT is skew to line JM. Parallel planes are simply planes that don't intersect. So, for example, we'll use a box again. The top and the bottom are parallel. They don't intersect. They're never going to touch. And again, you could use the slash for the word parallel, but there's no special symbol for parallel planes. So we just say planes ORN and plane TJM are parallel. So in this example, we're going to name segments and rays and then opposite rays. So we'll just kind of make a little label here for segments. Rays and opposite rays. So there's a lot of segments. Basically, anything that has two endpoints is a segment. So EF is a segment. There are endpoints at E and F. You could also say FH, segment FG, or even segment EH, because there is an endpoint at E and an endpoint at H, and I could draw a segment in between. Now for the rays, that can get a little trickier. So remembering a ray has to have an endpoint and one arrow. So we could see ray FH could be a ray because it has an endpoint at F and it goes towards H. So again, ordering does matter. We have to be careful about that. We also have ray FE. So it starts at F and goes towards E. Or we could also say ray FG. So we could call them that. We could also say ray HE because it can start at H and go towards E. We can see that figure in there hidden. You could actually even do ray EH because there is an endpoint at E and a line going towards H. That would work too. For the opposite rays, there are only two of them, FH and FE. So if we look here, ray FH is this ray right here. And ray FE is this ray. So together, they make a straight line. So we would say they are opposite rays. Okay, in this figure, you're supposed to name all the parallel planes that are in the picture. So we could have P, S, Q. That would be the top of the box. And the top would be parallel to the bottom. So we can name the bottom W, U, B. We're going to go around here. So we got the left and the right side. So P, S, W is parallel to Q, V, U. We can do the front and the back. Plane P, R, T is parallel to plane SQB. And those would be all of our parallel pairs. In the third example, we're supposed to name all segments that are parallel to AE. That would be right here. So we have 3 of them. We have segment DH, we have segment CG, and segment BF. Notice I'm not putting arrows on my symbols here because they asked you to name segments. And segments are different than lines. So we're going to change gears and we're going to go to skew. So if I look at AE again, I want lines that aren't parallel but don't touch either. So for example, CB would be a skew segment. FG is also skew. And these will never touch, but they're not parallel. We have CD, that's also skew. HG, and that's good for now. So we're going to name segments that are parallel to DC. There's 3 of them. HG, EF, and segment AB. And then the last one we're going to do is skew. So we have 4 of them. We have EH, FG, we have BF, and we have AE. These were examples that we did in class. So if you're in a classroom and you want to name parallel planes, you could say the floor and the ceiling. And this just helps us visualize these objects in a real world situation. And then there's tons of parallel lines in the classroom. You could say the top and bottom of the board. For skew lines in the classroom, that's a little bit harder. We need to remember skew lines are in different dimensions. So you could have a desktop with a textbook laying on top of it. One side of the textbook could be skewed to an edge of a desk because they are in different dimensions. So we'll use that as our example. So this is just a little activity to get us to understand which objects best represent the words. So the picture that best represents a segment is the dumbbell weight. For a ray, it would be the ray of sunshine. Opposite rays would be 6 o'clock, for example. Or you could do 9 and 3. Those would make opposite rays. Skew lines would have to be these because, again, they're not parallel, but they're not really intersecting. They're in different dimensions. And then our parallel planes could be the top and the bottom of the sandwich because they are surfaces that will not intersect. And parallel lines would be the lines in the field. You can see that they do run the same way, but they're not touching.